I never imagined that a place full of people could make me feel so alone. I was in the middle of Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, surrounded by hundreds of people, colors, voices, movements. But when I looked back and saw 3 men blocking the only exit I knew, I understood that something was very wrong. They weren't there by chance. They were there because of me. I started walking faster, trying to appear calm, but my heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. I turned into another corridor, looking for another exit, but there were more people watching me, whispering to each other, pointing in my direction. That's when I realized it wasn't paranoia. They were organized. They were surrounding me. This trip to Istanbul was everything I'd wanted for years. I work in technology, spending all day in front of a computer, solving other people's problems. I wanted to break out of that routine, see the real world, photograph places I'd only seen in movies. When I bought the ticket, I was excited for weeks. I thought about ancient mosques, the smell of spices, streets full of history. I imagined it would be an adventure, a unique experience. I never thought it would be dangerous. I never thought I might not be able to come back. But there, in the middle of that labyrinth of narrow corridors, with metal doors beginning to close behind me, I understood that I had entered something bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just pushy salespeople trying to get me to buy carpets. It was something else, something planned, something calculated. When I saw the man who had offered me tea minutes before reappear, but now with a completely different look, no smile, no sympathy, just watching where I was going, I felt fear creep up my spine. I was trapped, and nobody knew where I was. Before we continue, please comment below with the city you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. My name is Ethan Miller. I'm 32 years old and I live in Portland, Oregon. I work as an IT analyst at a mid-sized company. I spend 8 hours a day solving network problems, configuring servers, and answering support tickets. It's a stable job, it pays well, but it's repetitive. I wake up, go to work, come back, watch some TV series, and sleep. On weekends I shop, clean my apartment, sometimes go out with some colleagues for a beer. Nothing special. Nothing exciting. I've always liked photography. I started as a hobby a few years ago, buying a used camera. I photograph buildings, streets, details that people don't notice. But photographing Portland after years of seeing the same things gets boring. I started following photographers who travel the world, who show markets in Asia, temples in India, deserts in the Middle East. I looked at those photos and thought, I want to do that. I want to get out of here. I want to see something different. So, 6 months ago, I decided I was going to travel alone. I didn't wait for anyone to agree to go with me. I saved money, researched destinations, read travel blogs. I wanted a place with history, culture, something authentic. I thought about Morocco. I thought about Egypt, but it was Istanbul that caught my attention. The city lies between 2 continents, mixes mosques with skyscrapers, has ancient markets and modern streets. It seemed like the perfect place to photograph contrasts. I bought the ticket 3 months in advance. I chose to travel alone because I wanted freedom. I didn't want to depend on group itineraries, schedules, or other people. I wanted to walk around the city at my own pace, stop wherever I wanted, photograph whatever interested me. I read that Istanbul was safe for tourists, that the people were hospitable, that the only problem was insistent vendors in the markets. I thought I could handle that. I thought I could just say no and move on. The flight left Portland in the late afternoon. I had a layover in New York, then flew directly to Istanbul. It was almost 15 hours in the air. I arrived early in the morning, still a little groggy, but excited. The airport was huge, modern, full of shops and restaurants. I grabbed my suitcase, went through immigration without any problems, exchanged money, and took a taxi to the hotel. The hotel was in the Sultan Ahmet neighborhood, near the main tourist attractions. It was a simple but clean place. Small room with a single bed, cramped bathroom, window overlooking a narrow street. I left my suitcase, took a shower, changed clothes, and went out. I didn't want to waste time. I only had 5 days in the city and wanted to make the most of every one of them. The first thing that impressed me was the noise. Cars honking, people shouting, Street vendors offering water and peanuts, music coming from the shops. It was chaotic, but it had energy. I walked to the Blue Mosque. Up close, it was even more beautiful than in the photos. The enormous domes, the minarets pointing to the sky, the blue tiles shining in the sun. I took several photos. I went inside, took off my shoes, and stood there observing the architecture. It was impressive. Then I went to Hagia Sophia. More photos, more amazement. The building was gigantic. I felt like I was really in another place, far from Portland, far from my routine. That was exactly what I wanted. I had lunch at a small restaurant. I ordered kebab and tea. The food was good, well seasoned, different from what I ate at home. The restaurant owner was friendly, tried to speak English, asked where I was from, and said Portland was beautiful. On the second day, I woke up early and went to Topkapi Palace. More history, more beauty. I photographed gardens, fountains, and decorated halls. The place was enormous. I spent the whole morning there. In the afternoon, I walked through the streets near the port. I saw boats, fishermen, people selling fried fish. The smell of the sea mixed with the smell of food. Everything seemed so alive, so different. On the third day, I decided to visit the Grand Bazaar. I had read about it. It's one of the largest covered markets in the world, with thousands of shops selling everything: carpets, jewelry, spices, clothes, ceramics. They said it was easy to get lost inside, that the corridors were a labyrinth, but I like getting lost in new places. I think it's part of the experience. I arrived there around 10 in the morning. The main entrance was a large, beautifully decorated gate. I went in and was immediately enveloped by the activity. People everywhere. Tourists taking photos, vendors calling out to each other, colors everywhere. Carpets hanging, lights shining, piles of spices in shades of red, yellow, and orange. The smell was strong. Cinnamon, curry, coffee, incense. All mixed together. I started walking slowly, photographing details. A pile of hand-painted plates. A vendor preparing tea. A shop full of colorful lanterns. Each corridor led to another. Each shop seemed to hide another shop. It was truly a labyrinth, but I was enjoying it. I felt like an explorer. Some vendors called out to me. "My friend, come see. Best price for you. American? Welcome." I smiled, said, "No thank you," and continued on. Some insisted a little more, but nothing that seemed aggressive. It was normal. I expected it. After an hour of walking, I stopped at a carpet shop. The owner was a man of about 50, with gray hair and a mustache. He smiled and offered me tea. "Please sit down. No need to buy, just look." I thought it was nice. I sat on a small wooden stool. He brought me a small cup of hot, sweet tea. He started showing me carpets, unrolling them one by one, explaining the differences in style, region, and price. I didn't intend to buy anything, but I found it interesting to listen. He spoke English well, made jokes, and seemed genuinely happy to talk. He asked where I was from, what I did, if it was my first time in Istanbul. I answered everything, relaxed. He said Portland was far away, that I was brave to travel alone, that Turkey was safe and welcoming. After about 20 minutes, I thanked him for the tea and said I was going to keep walking. He didn't insist I buy anything. He just smiled and said, "Enjoy the bazaar, my friend." I left the shop thinking it had been a nice interaction. No pressure, just hospitality. I continued exploring. I went into jewelry stores, clothing stores, and ceramic shops. I bought some spices to take as gifts. The vendor put everything in colorful little bags, tied them with string, and charged a fair price. I put them in my backpack and continued on my way. It was almost noon. The bazaar was even more crowded. Groups of tourists with guides, local families shopping, people carrying enormous bags. The heat was starting to weigh on me. The bazaar had a high ceiling, but not much ventilation. The air was hot and stuffy. I decided I would leave, eat something, and rest a little. I tried to remember where I had entered, but all the corridors seemed the same. I turned left, then right, passing shops I thought I had seen before. I began to realize I was a little lost. I didn't panic. I knew I just had to keep walking, and eventually I would find an exit. The bazaar had several doors. I walked for a few more minutes. The corridors became increasingly narrow. Fewer tourists, more closed shops. I realized I was in a less busy part. I decided to go back to the main path, but when I turned around, I saw a salesman standing in the middle of the corridor, looking at me. He didn't say anything. He just looked. I thought it was strange, but I pretended not to see him and turned the other way. I entered a wider corridor. There were some shops open. In one of them, I saw the same man who had offered me tea. Mehmet, I think that was his name. He saw me and waved. "My friend, you come back!" I smiled and waved back, but I didn't stop. I kept walking. I felt him watching me. Further ahead, another salesman approached me. Young, maybe 25 years old, with a wide smile. "Sir, best carpets here. Come see. Special price today." I said no. "Thank you," he insisted. "Just 1 minute. I'll show you something very special." I said no again, more firmly. He stood in front of me for a few seconds, still smiling, but his eyes weren't smiling. Then he walked away. I started to feel uncomfortable. Nothing concrete, just a feeling that something wasn't quite right. I quickened my pace. I wanted to find a way out quickly. I turned left, looking for a sign indicating the exit. I didn't see any. The bazaar's aisles continued to multiply, each seemingly leading nowhere. I started paying more attention to the people around me. Some vendors looked at me differently. It wasn't the look of someone trying to sell something. It was the look of someone evaluating, measuring, calculating. I passed a carpet shop and saw 2 men talking quietly. When they saw me, they stopped talking and just stared at me. I kept walking, trying to appear calm, but my body was already tense. I turned right and entered another corridor. This one was even narrower. Almost all the shops on both sides were closed. Only 1 or 2 had their doors ajar, with someone inside rummaging through boxes. At the end of the hallway, I saw a metal door. I thought it might be a side exit. I quickened my pace. When I got close, the door was locked. I pushed. I pulled the handle. Nothing. I felt frustration rising. I looked around for another way. That's when I noticed the man who had tried to sell me carpets minutes before was standing in the hallway entrance watching me. He didn't move. He just stood there. I pretended not to see him and went back the same way. I passed him without looking directly. I felt him turn his head, following my steps. My heart started beating faster. I entered another corridor, this one wider, with more movement. I felt a little safer. There were tourists. There were people shopping. I took a deep breath. I tried to calm down. Maybe I was exaggerating. Maybe it was just a coincidence. I stopped at a spice shop. I pretended to be looking at the products. In reality, I was trying to get my bearings. I discreetly looked around. I saw that 3 salespeople were positioned at different points in the aisle. They weren't doing anything suspicious, but they were all watching me. One of them took out his cell phone and typed something. Then he looked in my direction again. I left the store and started walking faster. I turned into a corridor that seemed busier. There was a small sign with an arrow pointing to something in Turkish. I didn't understand what it said, but I followed the arrow. The corridor led to another corridor, and that one led to another. I was getting annoyed. It seemed deliberate, an endless labyrinth. I stopped a tourist, an older man with a German accent. I asked if he knew where the exit was. He vaguely pointed behind him and said something I didn't quite understand. I thanked him and followed in the direction he indicated. After a few meters, I realized I was back in the same area where I had had tea with Mehmet. I saw his shop on the right. He was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me. This time he didn't smile. He just nodded slowly, as if to say, he saw me. I turned around quickly. I entered a corridor with jewelry stores. Some women were shopping. I felt a little better in their presence. But when I looked back, I saw a tall man in a black jacket walking towards me. He wasn't running. He was just walking, but looking directly at me. I quickened my pace. I turned left. The man turned too. I turned right. He kept following me. Now I was sure. It wasn't a coincidence. He was following me on purpose. I started walking even faster, almost running. I passed shops, accidentally bumped into people, mumbled apologies. My breathing was rapid. Sweat dripped down my forehead. I saw a narrow staircase going down. I didn't know where it led, but I went down. The steps were made of stone, old and worn. Down below was another level of the bazaar. Less light, fewer people. Smaller, simpler shops. A smell of mold mixed with spices. I walked quickly, looking for any sign of an exit. Nothing. Just more corridors, more shops, more vendors staring at me. I tried to climb back up, but when I got to the top of the stairs, the man in the black jacket was standing, staring at me. I stopped halfway up the stairs. My heart raced. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, blocking the way. I went back down and ran the other way. I entered a corridor lined with clothing stores. I ran past. A saleswoman shouted something in Turkish. I didn't stop. I turned left again. Ahead, I saw two men talking. When they saw me, they stopped talking and stood still in the middle of the path. I had to slow down. I tried to pass between them, but one of them took a step to the side, blocking my way. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't move. He said something in Turkish. I didn't understand. I tried to go around to the other side. The other man also blocked me. I started to feel real panic. "I need to go," I said, louder. They looked at each other and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. I took a step back. They took a step forward. I looked around. There was no one nearby to ask for help, just closed shops and empty corridors. I felt like I was being cornered. I took a deep breath. I tried to think fast. If I ran back, the man in the black jacket might still be there. If I stayed there, I didn't know what they would do. One of them spoke again. He pointed to a door next to us. He gestured for me to go in. I shook my head. "No, I just want to leave." He insisted. He pointed again, more firmly. The other man took another step towards me. He was less than a meter away from me now. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned my head. It was Mehmet, the vendor who had offered me tea. He was walking slowly, hands in his pockets, a calm expression. When he got close, he said something in Turkish to the two men. They responded. Mehmet looked at me and smiled. But it wasn't the same smile as before. It was different, calculated, fake. "My friend," ele disse. "Why you running? We just want to talk." Sentiu medo subir pela garganta. "I don't want to talk. I just want to leave." Ele deu de ombros. "This is not good place to walk alone. Dangerous. Come with us. We help you find exit." I knew it was a lie. I knew that if I went through that door, something very bad was going to happen. I didn't know exactly what. Robbery, kidnapping, extortion. But I knew it wasn't going to be good. I looked at the three men. They were all looking at me, waiting, calculating. "No," I said, trying to sound firm. "I'm fine. I'll find the exit myself." Mehmet sighed. He spoke something in Turkish again. The two men began to approach. I took a step back. They took another step forward. I looked around desperately. I saw a narrow passage between two shops. Without thinking, I ran towards it. I heard shouts behind me, quick footsteps. I entered the passage. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one person to pass. I bumped into the walls. I reached the other side and kept running. I turned left, then right. I no longer knew where I was going. I just wanted distance. I passed a group of tourists. I thought about shouting, asking for help, but I didn't know if they would understand. I didn't know if they would believe. I kept running. My lungs burned. My backpack pounded against my back. I turned into another corridor. This one had more people. Vendors, buyers, movement. I felt a little safer. I slowed down, trying not to draw attention. I walked quickly but without running. I looked back. I didn't see anyone following me, but that didn't mean I was safe. They could be anywhere. The bazaar was too big. They knew every corner. I didn't. I saw a large ceramics shop with several people inside. I went in. I pretended to be looking at the products. In reality, I was trying to hide, trying to think. My head was spinning. What did I do now? How did I get out of there? I took out my cell phone. I thought about calling someone, but who? I was alone in a foreign country. I didn't know anyone. The police? What was I going to say? That some vendors were following me? That I thought they wanted to get me? It seemed like paranoia, but I knew it wasn't. I had seen the coordination, the messages on the cell phone, the roadblocks in the hallways. They were organized. They had done this before. I wasn't the first. I stayed in the store for about 5 minutes. Then I left slowly. I looked both ways. Nothing suspicious. I started walking again, looking for signs, looking for doors, looking for anything that looked like an exit. I went through more aisles. Everything looked the same. Carpets, jewelry, spices, an endless loop. Then I saw a large wooden door. It looked old and heavy. It had a carved symbol on it that I didn't recognize, but it looked like an exit. I went over to it. I pushed. The door opened. On the other side was a street. Sunlight. Fresh air. I almost cried with relief. I took a step outside. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around quickly. It was a man I hadn't seen before. Older. About 60 years old. White beard. Simple clothes. He spoke something in Turkish, pointing inside the bazaar. I didn't understand anything. I tried to break free, but he held my arm tightly. He spoke again, louder, gesturing. He seemed irritated. I pulled my arm away forcefully and managed to break free. I ran out into the street. He yelled after me but didn't follow. I ran about 20 meters and stopped, breathless. I looked around. It was a side street, less busy than the main ones. A few small shops, parked cars, few people walking. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. I had managed to get out. I was outside the bazaar. But when I looked back, I saw I wasn't alone. Across the street, leaning against a car, was the man in the black jacket. He was looking at me. He took out his cell phone and said something. My stomach clenched. They had people outside too. Of course they did. It wasn't just inside the bazaar. It was bigger than that. I started walking fast, down the street. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted distance. I looked back again. The man was following me, walking towards me, cell phone still in his hand. I crossed the street without looking properly. A car honked. It almost hit me. I reached the other side and kept walking. I entered a wider street with more people. Clothing stores, cafes, people sitting at tables. I felt a little better. But when I looked again, I saw that now there were 2 men following me. The one in the black jacket and another, younger one, in a red shirt. They weren't running. They were just keeping my distance, but always there. I thought about going into a shop and asking for help. But what would I say? I didn't speak Turkish. What if they knew the shop owners? What if this was something everyone knew, but nobody talked about? Tourists disappearing, being extorted, being taken somewhere. I felt a chill in my stomach just thinking about it. I kept walking. I turned left. The street got steeper. It descended towards a neighborhood that seemed residential. Fewer shops, more old buildings with iron balconies, clothes hanging from the windows, children playing on the sidewalk. I thought maybe they wouldn't follow me there. Maybe they would give up. I looked back. They were still there. Further away now, but still following me. And there was another one. 3 men now. How could they communicate so quickly? How many were? I felt despair tighten my chest. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I saw a narrow alley to the right. I went in without thinking. The alley was dark, damp, with garbage piled up in the corners. It smelled bad. I walked quickly, almost tripping over garbage bags. At the end of the alley, there was a staircase going up. I climbed it. The steps were uneven, some broken. I reached the top. It was an empty terrace, with a clothesline and old boxes stacked on top of each other. I looked around. There was no way out, only the way back. I had walked into a trap. I went to the edge of the terrace and looked down. Too high. I couldn't jump. I looked to the sides. Neighboring buildings had balconies, but they were too far away. I couldn't reach them. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming up. My heart raced. I looked for something to defend myself with. I grabbed a piece of wood that was near the boxes. It was rotten, almost broken, but it was better than nothing. I stood there, holding the stick, waiting. The man in the black jacket appeared at the top of the stairs. He saw me and stopped. He looked at the penis in my hand and smiled. He said something in Turkish. I didn't understand, but his tone was mocking. He took a step forward. I took a step back. "Stay away from me," I yelled. My voice came out trembling. He kept advancing. Slowly, without haste. Behind him, the man in the red shirt appeared. Now there were two of them. I was cornered. "What do you want?" I yelled again. The man in the black jacket said something. He gestured with his hand as if he were asking for something. Money? A cell phone? Or did they want to take me somewhere? I didn't know, and I wasn't going to find out. When they took another step, I ran. I ran straight towards them, holding my penis. They weren't expecting it. The man in the red shirt tried to grab me, but I dodged and pushed him with my shoulder. He stumbled. I ran down the stairs, almost falling. I reached the alley and kept running. I heard screams behind me. They were coming. I left the alley and went back to the street. I ran downhill. People looked at me, scared. A woman shouted something. I didn't stop. I turned left, entered another street. This one had traffic. Cars, motorcycles, buses. I ran across between the cars, horns blaring, brakes screeching. I got to the other side and kept going. My lungs burned. My legs ached. My backpack weighed me down. But I couldn't stop. I looked back. They were still there. They had crossed the street too. And now there were 4. How did another one appear? Where did they come from? I saw a mosque ahead, large, with a garden in front. I thought about going in, asking for help. But what if they wouldn't let me in? What if it was disrespectful? What if they followed me there? I didn't know. I kept running. I passed the mosque. I entered a commercial area. Electronics stores, banks, pharmacies. More people. More activity. I thought maybe they would give up here. I slowed down, trying to blend in with the people. I walked quickly, but without running. I looked at shop windows, feigning interest. I tried to seem normal. I stopped at a corner, pretending I was waiting for someone. I looked discreetly. I saw 2 of them on the other side of the street, standing there, watching, waiting to see what I would do. I felt like I was being hunted, like an animal. They knew I was tired. They knew I didn't know the city. It was only a matter of time before they caught me. I went into an electronics store. I pretended I was looking at cell phones. The salesman approached and spoke in Turkish. I nodded. He tried in English. "You want a phone?" I said I was just looking. He insisted a little, but then left me alone. I stood there for a few minutes, looking through the window display. I saw that the men were still on the other side of the street. Now they were talking amongst themselves. One of them pointed in the direction of the store. They had seen me go in. I thought about asking the shopkeeper for help. But what was I going to say? That I was being followed? Would he believe me? Or would he think I was crazy? Or worse, maybe he knew them. Maybe he was part of it. I couldn't trust anyone. I was alone. Completely alone. I left the store through the back door. I ended up on a smaller, less busy street. I walked quickly. I turned right, then left, trying to create distance, trying to disappear. I went into a small market. I squeezed between the shelves. I left through the back door. I ended up on a narrow street with uneven cobblestones. I took a deep breath. I looked around. Nobody. Silence. Only the distant sound of traffic. I started walking, trying to get my bearings. I didn't know where I was anymore. I was completely lost trying to escape. I took out my cell phone. I tried to open the map. No signal. Of course, nothing could be easy. I kept walking. The street led to another street. This one had a few shops open. A bakery, a clothing store, a small coffee shop. I stopped. I looked around. Nobody was following me, at least not that I could see. I went into the coffee shop. There were few people inside. 2 women chatting at a table, a man reading a newspaper, a woman behind the counter, perhaps in her 40s, hair tied back, white apron. She looked at me and smiled. She said something in Turkish. I nodded. She tried in English. "Coffee?" I said, "Yeah." She made Turkish coffee. Small, strong, served in a tiny cup. I paid. I sat at a table near the... I drank slowly. It was hot and my hand trembled as I held the cup. I looked out the window. The street seemed calm. No one suspicious. Maybe I had managed to lose them. Maybe I had managed to escape, but I still didn't feel safe. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how to get back to the hotel, and I was afraid to leave and run into them again. The woman behind the counter looked at me. She should have noticed something was wrong. My panicked expression, my sweaty clothes, my trembling hands. She said something. I didn't understand. She tried again in English. "You okay?" I looked at her. For a moment, I thought about telling her everything. But what would I say? I didn't even know how to properly explain what had happened. He had gone into a bazaar, had been followed, had run away. It seemed simple, but it had been terrifying. "I'm okay," I said. She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist. I stayed there a few more minutes. I finished my coffee. I checked my phone. Now I had a signal. I opened the map. I was far from the hotel. Very far. I would have to take a taxi. Or a bus. But I didn't know where the bus stop was. And I was afraid of waiting on the street. That's when I looked out the window again, and I felt my blood run cold. Across the street, leaning against a lamppost, was Mehmet, looking at me, smiling. I stood up too quickly. The chair scraped against the floor, making a noise. The woman behind the counter looked at me, startled. Mehmet was still on the other side of the street, standing there, watching. He wasn't trying to hide. He wanted me to know he was there, that they had found me again. I looked around the cafeteria for another exit. There was a door in the back, near the bathroom. I pointed to it and looked at the woman. "Back door?" She frowned, confused. I repeated, this time pointing more. "Back door. Exit?" She understood and shook her head negative. She said something in Turkish, pointing ahead, to the front door. The only way out was through where I had entered, where Mehmet was waiting. I felt despair tighten in my throat. I looked out the window again. Now there were two more men with him. They were talking quietly. One of them pointed to the cafeteria. The woman noticed my panic. She came over to my desk. "Problem?" I looked at her. I didn't know if I could trust her, but I had no choice. I pointed to the window. "Those men. They're following me." She looked outside. She looked at the men. Then she looked at... Her expression changed. It became serious. She understood. Perhaps it wasn't the first time she'd seen this. She spoke something quickly to herself in Turkish. Then she motioned for me to wait. She went to the counter and picked up her cell phone. He called someone. He spoke quickly, looking out the window. Then he hung up and came back to me. "My cousin. He's coming. 5 minutes. You wait here." I nodded. I had no other option. I sat down again, but away from the window. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ear. The minutes passed slowly. The woman went back to the counter but kept looking at me. The other people in the coffee shop didn't notice anything. They continued chatting, drinking coffee, acting normal. I was there, sweating profusely, my hands trembling, while the world around me went on as if nothing was happening. I looked at my phone's clock. 3 minutes. I looked again at the window, hidden behind the wall. Mehmet had crossed the street. He was closer now. The other two men were too. They were talking, but they kept looking at the coffee shop, waiting. They knew I would have to leave at some point. 4 minutes. The cafeteria door opened. A young man entered, maybe 25 years old, wearing jeans and a t-shirt. He looked around and came straight to me. The woman said something in Turkish. He waved and motioned for me to stand up. "Come. Fast." I got up. He went to the back of the cafeteria, to the door I thought was a dead end. He opened it. It was a small pantry, full of boxes and bags. At the back, there was another door, smaller. He opened that one too. It led to a narrow, dark corridor that seemed to connect the backs of several buildings. "Go," he said, nudging my shoulder lightly. I went inside. The hallway smelled of garbage and dampness. You could barely see. He closed the door behind us and turned on his phone's flashlight. "Follow me." No talk. We continued down the corridor. It was narrow, the walls exposed brick, the floor uneven. We passed other doors, other exits. He knew the way. He walked quickly, confidently. I tried to keep up, stumbling now. After about 2 minutes, he stopped at a metal door. He pushed. It creaked loudly. We came out onto a different street. It was a quiet residential street with old cars parked. He looked both ways. Okay, we'll go. We started walking. We weren't running, but we were walking fast. We turned left, then right. He led me through streets I would never have found on my own. Alleys, shortcuts, passageways between buildings. After about 5 minutes, we stopped. He pointed to a larger street ahead. Taxi there. You'll go to the hotel. Quick. Understand? I nodded. I didn't know how to thank him. I tried to talk, but he was already leaving. He waved from afar and disappeared into an alley. I stood still for a few seconds, taking a deep breath. I looked around. No one was following me. No one suspicious. I walked to the main street. There was movement. Cars passing by. People walking. I felt a little safer. I saw a taxi stopped a few meters ahead. I went to it. The driver was fiddling with his cell phone. I knocked on the window. He looked. I gestured, pointing inside. He unlocked the doors. I got into the back seat. I quickly closed and locked the door. Hotel, I said, showing him the address on my phone. He looked and nodded. He started the car and began to drive. I sank into the seat. I closed my eyes. I felt the relief begin to come, but along with it came the trembling. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. My legs too. I took a deep breath, trying to control myself. I opened my eyes and looked out the window. Streets passing by. Buildings. People. Everything normal. But I didn't feel normal. I felt destroyed. I looked in the rearview mirror. No cars following us. I looked in the side mirror. Nothing. But still, I couldn't completely relax. Every car that stayed behind us for too long made me tense. Every motorcycle that sped past made me jump. The taxi crossed a bridge. I recognized the area. We were getting close to Sultanahmet, close to the hotel. Just a few more minutes. Just a few more minutes, and I would be safe. Locked in my room, far from all this. We arrived at the street where the hotel was located. The driver stopped. I paid. I gave a tip. More than usual. He thanked me. I got out of the taxi, looking around. The street was quiet. Tourists strolling. Street vendors. Everything normal. I went into the hotel quickly. The receptionist greeted me. He smiled. He said something about how my day had been. I forced a smile and said I was tired. I took the key and went up to the room. Each step of the stairs felt heavy. My body was exhausted. I reached the room. I opened the door. I went in. I locked it from the inside. I put the chair against the doorknob. I closed the window. I closed the curtain. I sat on the bed. I stayed there, still, just breathing. My clothes were soaked with sweat. My feet ached. My head throbbed. I took off my backpack. I opened it. My things were crumpled, a mess. The camera was there, intact. The spices I had bought, everything intact. But I didn't feel intact. I felt broken. I got up and went to the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. My face was red, sweaty, and marked. I had a scratch on my arm that I hadn't even noticed when it happened. I washed my face with cold water. The water ran off, washing away the sweat, but it didn't wash away the fear. I went back to my room. I sat on the bed again. I picked up my cell phone. I thought about calling someone, my parents, a friend. But what was I going to say? That I had been followed? That I was almost kidnapped? It seemed unreal. But it had happened. It had been real. Very real. I looked at my watch. It was still late. Outside, Istanbul continued. Tourists visiting mosques. People eating in restaurants. The city went on. But for me, it had changed. It was no longer that exotic and fascinating place I had seen in the photos. It was dangerous. Hostile. Unpredictable. I lay down on the bed. I closed my eyes. But each time I closed them, I saw the men's faces. Mehmet smiling. The man in the black jacket climbing the stairs. The endless corridors of the bazaar. The roadblocks. The closed doors. I opened my eyes again. I couldn't rest. I got up and went to the window. I opened the curtain just a little. I looked at the street. It was getting dark. The lights were starting to come on. People walking, cars passing by. Everything seemed normal, but I knew it wasn't. I knew that somewhere in the city those men were still there, looking for other tourists, other victims. I thought about going to the police, filing a police report, but what would I say? I didn't know their full names. I had no proof. I had no witnesses. I had escaped. That was all. He had escaped by luck, thanks to a woman who didn't know me, because of her cousin who guided me through the alleys. I closed the curtain again. I sat on the bed. I picked up the camera. I looked at the photos I had taken. The bazaar in the morning, the colors, the lights, the carpets. It seemed like another world. It seemed safe, beautiful. But I knew what had happened afterward. I knew what was behind those images. I deleted some photos. I didn't want to remember. I didn't want to have that on my phone, on my computer, in my memory. But I knew I wouldn't be able to erase what I had lived through. It would stay. Forever. Night fell. I didn't leave the room. I ordered food by phone. The hotel offered room service. A sandwich and water arrived. I ate without tasting it, just because I knew I needed to eat. Then I took a shower. The hot water helped a little. It relaxed my muscles, but not my mind. I lay down. I left the bathroom light on. I didn't want to be in total darkness. I closed my eyes. I tried to sleep, but every noise woke me up. Footsteps in the hallway, a door slamming, distant voices. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't stop. Finally, in the early morning, I managed to fall asleep, but it was a restless sleep. I dreamt of corridors, closed doors, men following me. I woke up several times sweating, my heart racing. I looked around. Hotel room, locked door, safe, but I didn't feel safe. When dawn broke, I was already awake. I looked out the window. The city was waking up. The sun was rising. A new day. But for me, everything had changed. I was no longer the same Ethan who had arrived so excited days before. Something had broken. Something had been lost in those corridors. I spent the rest of that day locked in my room. I didn't even go out to eat. I ordered food by phone again. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking. My return flight was still in 3 days. 3 more days in Istanbul. 3 days that now seemed like an eternity. I thought about changing my flight, coming back earlier. But when I looked at the prices, it was too expensive. Much more than I could afford. I would have to stay. I would have to endure it. But the idea of leaving the hotel, of walking the streets, scared me. A fear I had never felt before. A fear that stayed in my stomach. Heavy. Constant. On the second day, I forced myself to go out. I couldn't stay locked up until my flight. I needed to eat properly. I needed to move around. But I went out carefully, looking all around. I chose a restaurant near the hotel. Very busy, full of tourists. I sat at a table where I could see the street. I ordered food, but I could barely eat. I kept looking at the door. Every person who went in, I looked at. Every man who passed by on the street, I checked out. I went back to the hotel quickly. I felt safer inside. I spent the rest of the day back in my room. I tried to watch TV. I tried to read. I tried to edit some photos, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept going back to the bazaar, to the corridors, to the men following me, to the moment I realized I was trapped. On the second night, I managed to sleep better. Exhaustion had won, but the dreams continued to be bad. Endless corridors, doors closing, voices shouting in Turkish. I woke up a few times but went back to sleep. On the third day, the day of the flight, I woke up early. I packed my things slowly. I put everything in my suitcase. The camera, the clothes, the spices I had bought, which now reminded me of the worst day of my life. I thought about throwing them away, but I didn't. I don't know why. The flight was at night. I had the whole day ahead of me. I thought about visiting somewhere else. The city still had so much to see, but I couldn't. The idea of going out, of exposing myself, was too much. I stayed at the hotel until it was time to go to the airport. I checked out. The receptionist asked if I had enjoyed my stay. I said yes, forcing a smile. He asked if I had visited everything I wanted. I said yes again. I lied. I took a taxi to the airport. During the ride, I kept looking at the city through the window. Istanbul passing by. Beautiful, historic, vibrant, but I couldn't feel it. I could only feel the fear I had felt, the despair, the loneliness of being in a foreign place with no one to help me. I arrived at the airport hours early. I checked in. I went through security. I sat in the boarding area. I stayed there, waiting, watching the other passengers, tourists returning from vacation, business people, families. Everyone seemed calm, normal. No one seemed to have gone through what I went through. When they called my flight, I stood up relieved. I boarded. I found my seat, window seat. I put my carry-on bag in the overhead compartment. I sat down. I fastened my seatbelt. I closed my eyes. Only when the plane took off, only when I felt the city receding below, was I able to truly breathe, to breathe without fear, without looking to the sides, without checking who was nearby. The flight was long. I slept most of it. When I woke up, I looked out the window. Just clouds. Just sky. Far from everything. Safe. Finally, safe. I arrived in New York. I made the connection. I flew to Portland. When the plane landed, when I set foot on American soil again, I felt an enormous relief. I was home. I was in my country. I was safe. I grabbed my bags. I left the airport. I took an Uber. The driver tried to start a conversation. He asked where I was coming from. I said Turkey. He said he'd always wanted to visit. He said it looked amazing. I just nodded. I didn't want to talk about it. I arrived at my apartment. I opened the door. I went inside. I put my bags on the floor. I looked around. Everything was just as I had left it. My sofa, my TV, my books, my life. I sat on the sofa. I stayed there, just feeling the silence. The safe silence. The familiar silence. In the following days, I tried to get back into my routine. I went back to work. I sat at my desk. I turned on my computer. I answered emails. I handled calls. Everything normal. My colleagues asked how the trip had been. I said it had been good. I showed them some photos. They said they were beautiful. That Istanbul looked incredible. I smiled. I didn't tell them the rest. But the trip had changed something in me. I wasn't the same anymore. At night I had trouble sleeping. I dreamed about the corridors. About the men following me. I'd wake up sweating. My heart racing. I'd get up. Drink water. Try to go back to sleep. Sometimes I could. Sometimes I couldn't. I stopped taking photos. The camera was put away. I no longer had the desire. Every time I looked at it, I remembered Istanbul. The bazaar. The fear. I thought about selling the camera, but I didn't. I just left it stored away. Forgotten. My desire to travel had vanished. Before, I would look at photos of distant places, dreaming of visiting them. Now the idea of leaving the country made me anxious. What if it happened again? What if I got stuck somewhere else? What if no one helped me? Weeks later, I tried to watch a documentary about Turkey. I couldn't. I turned it off after 5 minutes. The sound of Turkish made me feel sick. The images of the streets reminded me. I turned off the TV. I sat in the dark. A friend invited me on a trip. He said he was going to Mexico. He said it would be fun. That I needed to get out of Portland. I thanked him, but refused. He insisted. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes. He didn't believe me, but he didn't insist anymore. Over time, things improved. Slowly, very slowly. The dreams became less frequent. The fear became more controlled. I started going out again. I started living again. But something had been left behind. That excitement of seeing the world. That confidence that everything would be all right. That innocence of thinking that traveling alone was just an adventure. I learned that the world isn't just what appears in photos. That behind the colors and lights there can be danger. That not every smile is friendly. That being alone in a foreign country can be dangerous in ways I never imagined. Sometimes I still think about Aysen, the woman from the coffee shop, and her cousin, the only people who helped me, who saw my despair and acted, without knowing me, without expecting anything in return. I'd like to thank them again, to say they saved me, but I don't know their full name. I don't know where to find them. I only know that I owe them more than they can imagine. The trip to Istanbul should have been the best experience of my life. It was supposed to be the beginning of many more, but it ended up being the end of my desire to explore, the end of my confidence, the end of a part of me that never returned. Today, when someone asks me if I plan to travel again, I say maybe, but I know I won't. Not anytime soon. Maybe never alone again, because I learned the hard way that the world can be dangerous and that we can't always escape. I was lucky, very lucky, but what if I hadn't been? That question keeps nagging at me. It won't go away, and I don't think it ever will. It's been almost a year since that day at the Grand Bazaar. A whole year. 365 days. And yet, some days, it feels like yesterday. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I'm back in those corridors, that I'm trapped, that there's no way out. Then I open my eyes and see my room, my bed, my window, Portland, home, safe. I went back to work as normal. Life went on. The bills kept coming. The work projects kept appearing. Everything went back to the way it was before, at least on the outside. Inside, something changed forever. There's a part of me that stayed in that bazaar, trapped between those aisles, running from those men. That part never came back. The camera is still stored away. I haven't sold it, but I don't use it. It stays there, in the drawer, along with the memories I prefer to forget. Every now and then I think about taking it out, thinking about going back to photographing Portland, the streets I know, the safe places. But I haven't managed to yet. Maybe someday. Maybe never. I don't tell this story to many people. My parents don't. My friends know very little. But the trip wasn't what I expected. It wasn't worth it. I don't intend to repeat it. They think it's because I didn't like the city. They don't know it's because I almost didn't go back. There's something I've learned that I want to make clear. The world isn't always safe. Even though we read travel blogs saying that a certain place is peaceful, that a certain city is hospitable, that the only problems are pushy salespeople, it's not always true. Things happen that nobody talks about. Tourists disappear. People are extorted. Schemes that work because nobody reports them. I was lucky, very lucky. I met good people at the right time. Ison could have ignored my despair. She could have thought it was my problem, but she didn't. She helped. Her cousin helped. And because of that, I'm here. Alive. Safe. Telling this story. But how many others weren't so lucky? How many others entered that bazaar and didn't come out? How many were taken to those back rooms? How many paid to escape? How many couldn't pay? These questions haunt me, because I know I wasn't the only target. I know those men do this all the time, that it's organized, that it's a scheme, and that it keeps happening. I thought many times about reporting it, about writing to the American consulate, about giving details. But what would I say? I don't know the full names. I don't know exactly where the stores were located. I have no proof. I have no photos. I only have my word. And my word against an entire scheme isn't worth much. So I do what I can. I tell the story. I warn other people. When someone says they're going to travel alone, I say, be careful. Don't trust everyone. Don't go into places without knowing the exit. Don't accept invitations from strangers. It may seem like paranoia. It may seem like an exaggeration. But it's not. It's experience. It's the price I paid for learning. If you're watching this and planning a trip, I'm not saying don't go. I'm saying go prepared. Go alert. Don't assume nothing bad will happen just because you're a tourist. Because it can happen. And when it does, it happens fast. And you need to be ready to react. I wasn't ready. I went into that bazaar thinking it was just another tourist outing, thinking the worst that could happen was buying something overpriced. I never imagined I'd have to run for my life, that I'd have to hide, that I'd depend on the kindness of strangers to survive. But I survived. I escaped. I returned. And now I tell this story so that other people don't go through the same thing, so that other people know that the danger exists, that it's not a legend, that it's not an exaggeration. It's real. Very real. Istanbul remains a beautiful city, historic, full of culture. But for me, it will always be the place where I almost died, where I almost disappeared, where I learned that the world can be cruel to those who are alone and vulnerable. And that's a lesson I'll never forget. If this story helped you in any way, if it made you think twice before traveling unprepared, then it was worth telling. Leave a comment saying what you thought. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And share this video, because the more people know, the fewer people will go through what I went through. Thank you for watching until the end. And remember, the world is big and beautiful, but it can also be dangerous. Travel, explore. But travel carefully. Always carefully.